All right, here we go again. So, uh, one of the things somewhere along the way that I wrote to the government about maybe in like as early as 2008 or so, I can't remember. I said about Afghanistan. I said we're waging a Vietnam style battle, essentially outside of the combat zone. They're being supplied outside the combat zone, by personnel, uh, receiving personnel, receiving weaponry. We're it. Let me back up because I've explained it before. I'll explain it again. There is a Marine Corps, so lieutenant, I think he was. He was wounded in Vietnam. He was a Marine lieutenant. He was wounded. He came back stateside, healed, and became an analyst. State Department, maybe CIA, I can't remember. So he said that the whole gist, I think it was Soldier of Fortune or Gung Ho, his whole thing was that if he'd have known Kissinger wasn't pre-briefed, he'd have conducted a better briefing. He believed Kissinger was already briefed, and he was just going to, touch on the uh, the high points. But what he found out was that Kissinger was never briefed. Now this was like 19. He did this in like 1975 or 74, like somewhere near the end. I don't remember 73. I can't remember when it was. I can't even remember what the last year of Vietnam was at this point. If I studied, I'm sure I'd see it, but neither here nor there. It was near the end. There were three main units in Vietnam that were Vietnamese units that were valid units. One was a Marine amphibious unit. One was uh, I think a Ranger unit, and one may have been like an SF unit. And of course, they were trained by our Rangers, trained by our SF, trained by our Marines. So there was going to be an amphibious landing in North Vietnam. There was going to be, probably a helicopter kind of aircraft thing, and I think there's some people were going to jump in. The SF was going to jump in or something. I can't remember completely everything, but essentially what they were going to do is they were going to destroy the North Vietnam supply centers and their manufacturers, their factories. And it would take them at least a year to rebuild. And what this would have done, this would have held off that offensive, right? Those final offensives. Apparently, Kissinger wasn't pre-briefed, and there may have been some other people there that were pre-briefed. And he believes he didn't go into enough depth for them to completely understand the concept of the operation. He said it was rather simple. And it just boggles the mind why we never did it beforehand. Why we never attacked into North Vietnam in that manner, like a ground. But again, that's like kind of a metaphysical, like why didn't we see it? So again, the idea in Afghanistan was the same thing. I believe that we should have went all the way. And it's my surge, I said something about a surge somewhere around 2008. My surge included going into Pakistan. And I said, you give them an ultimatum, you either let us in or we come in. Right. So with my surge, you'd have found bin Laden probably a few years earlier instead of the mini surge they did. If they would have taken what I told them to do and actually did it the way I wanted them to do it, you'd have found bin Laden. I said the surge into Pakistan, they wanted to be more sensitive, I guess. I guess it was a bunch of officers. So you would have found bin Laden a lot earlier because he would have moved. He would have probably moved. He would have bugged out. I think that was one of the region. The region he was in was one of the regions I said I can't remember the full plan. I think I may have actually. I don't know if I did a map or not. So again, when we're looking at the narcotics war, it's the same thing. It's actually never been a war, but we're not going into North Vietnam. We're sitting here and letting it be supplied. Now you're going into North Vietnam. Right? So we keep replaying the same bullshit. So again, when that happens, the quickest thing is just to disengage. So like I said, you spend it's the best option because then you don't become the enemy. You're the occupier. You become the liberator. Right? So that's why it's important to try to have a coalition in a lot of these things because again, we don't want to stick around. We want to leave some spec ops. We want to leave some aviation support, but you want to be prepared to return. So again, your whole goal once you get there is to set up Reforger. Obviously this thing looks like it's going to go to a peaceful resolution, I imagine. Right. So your whole goal initially is to be able to structure some return of forces. Like you're not going to disengage until you can disengage, but your whole goal is to pull back, set up pumpkin sites, pre state pre-supplied, locations with vehicles and supplies. And then what you do is you go back every so often and you test the equipment and all that stuff, or have people on site that do that. Well, because there's the hearts and minds was very intelligent. It's just you can't do it unless you have the right people. So once they lost Gant, the hearts and minds were gone. Right. Because people are metaphysical and they can feel and they know if you're bullshitting them. Right. Gant wasn't bullshitting them, he was real. Right. Especially people like the Afghans. Probably have some sixth sense when it comes to bullshit, whether somebody's bullshitting them. And collateral damage is important to avoid. Again, I think with AI, it's probably eventually that'll make its way into all of the AI. I mean, option. It doesn't have to be, but an option to say, hey, we don't want collateral damage, so it'll begin to work how to avoid collateral damage. Saying that for years, I guess at this point, or a couple of years. But we have to stop this narcotics. Again, you have to stop the wars. You have to stop narcotics. But sometimes you get to the other side of something, you need the war. As far as the Ukrainians or Russians are concerned, I mean, it's insane. I have no idea what they're doing. Right. I knew it was going to be this. I saw trench warfare kind of war. Right. Slugfest back and forth. Bodies being hurled at the enemy. I used the term trench warfare somewhere along the way, early on. Right. Well, it's just you can't. If you again, that model was proven a failed model in Vietnam. You can't fight a war without going after where the personnel and the supplies and all of that are coming from. You can't allow another nation to be a safe haven, that kind of thing. I mean, they bombed, I think, a little bit North Vietnam, but they didn't go in and on a on the ground operation, which didn't make any sense. You can't win with the Air Force. We realized that by the time maybe it was lessons learned from Vietnam. We knew that the air war wouldn't get us anywhere. Again, maybe here it's a little different, but